It didn't mean much to me until I actually experienced it, Paul McCartney once said, reflecting on a moment that would later become iconic in music history. At first, it was just a passing idea, a flicker of thought. But that spark, over time, grew into a phenomenon that would touch millions worldwide. For Paul, it was never just music, it was connection, expression, and at times conflict. Nowhere was this more evident than in his complex relationship with George Harrison, the quiet genius behind some of the Beatles' most haunting melodies. Their story is not just about collaboration. It's about rivalry, misunderstanding, and the unspoken tension that simmered beneath the stage lights. Few stories in music history reveal the fragility behind genius more clearly than the relationship between Paul and George. McCartney's drive for perfection often clashed with Harrison's desire for creative freedom and spiritual expression. Behind the gleaming facade of the Beatles' success, these fractures grew, shaping not only the band's internal dynamics, but also the trajectory of their legendary careers. Paul's journey began in Liverpool, in a modest household shaped by love, discipline, and tragedy. His father, Jim McCartney, worked as a cotton salesman and had a deep love for music, often playing piano at home. His mother, Mary, was a nurse and the family's emotional anchor. She nurtured Paul's early creativity, encouraging him to explore music, even as the world around him demanded practicality. Tragedy struck when Paul was only 14. His mother died of breast cancer, leaving a void that would haunt him for years. In interviews decades later, Paul still recounted the grief and the sudden responsibility that fell upon him. That loss was not just personal, it shaped his entire approach to life and music. It became the seed from which Let It Be emerged. In a dream years later, Mary appeared to him, softly whispering, "Let it be." That simple phrase became a mantra, a way to navigate grief and a guiding light in his creative life. Paul's first guitar, bought by his father, was right-handed, yet Paul was left-handed. Undeterred, he carefully reversed the strings and practiced tirelessly. Each note, each chord, was a triumph over adversity. This painstaking method was not a limitation. It became the foundation of his unique style, the sound that would later define the Beatles. George Harrison, the young guitar prodigy. While Paul's childhood was marked by loss and musical discovery, George Harrison's formative years had a different rhythm. Born into a working-class family in Liverpool, George attended the Liverpool Institute, where he often clashed with teachers and authority figures. Labeled rebellious, he found little joy in formal education. Yet George possessed a natural gift for guitar, effortlessly replicating complex riffs he heard on the radio. His talent was innate, raw, and precise, qualities that would later prove invaluable to the Beatles. Despite their differences, Paul noticed George's potential. He recognized that Harrison's talent was not just skill, but something rare, a spark that could elevate a band from local fame to global legend. The meeting that changed music history. In 1957, Paul attended a small church performance where John Lennon performed. John's charisma on stage was magnetic, and his presence immediately captivated Paul. A brief conversation revealed a shared hunger for music, a mutual understanding of artistic ambition. John invited Paul to join his band, and soon the first songs were born. This collaboration marked the genesis of the Beatles. George Harrison entered the picture shortly thereafter. Paul knew him from school, and he quickly saw the potential for a new creative dynamic. George auditioned for John and impressed him with flawless riffs, earning his place in what was now no longer just a local band, but a budding musical revolution. The triangle of John, Paul, and George was complete, and the Beatles were on the verge of changing music history forever. The first cracks: collaboration versus conflict. The early years of the Beatles were marked by experimentation, camaraderie, and boundless creativity. Yet, beneath the harmony, tensions simmered. By 1967, the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band revealed subtle shifts in dynamics. Paul's perfectionism and leadership tendencies began to clash with George's growing confidence as a songwriter. George wanted to be recognized not merely as a guitarist, but as a creative force with a voice of his own. Paul often critiqued George's compositions, feeling that his own Lennon-McCartney songs set the standard. George, frustrated by repeated dismissals, grew distant. Their clashes were not merely about ego, they were about philosophy, style, and the very meaning of music. George wanted expression, freedom, and spiritual resonance. Paul sought precision, polish, and perfection. The White Album and beyond, tensions explode. During the White Album sessions in 1968, tensions reached a boiling point. Paul's insistence on exacting standards led to repeated arguments, and George temporarily walked out of the studio. Although he returned, the emotional rift had formed. The dynamics within the band were further destabilized by the death of manager Brian Epstein, whose guidance had previously kept their egos in check. Without him, Paul tried to steer the band, but his ambitions inadvertently alienated George further. This period also exposed philosophical divides. George's immersion in Indian music, meditation, and Eastern spirituality contrasted sharply with Paul's pragmatic approach to recording and album production. When the Beatles traveled to India to study with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Paul's focus remained on future projects while George sought spiritual growth. This divergence highlighted a fundamental difference. For George, music was sacred, a vessel for transcendence. For Paul, it was both a craft and a tool for global influence. The breakup and solo journeys. The Beatles disbanded in 1970, freeing both men to explore paths previously constrained by band dynamics. George finally had the opportunity to step out of the shadows. His solo album, All Things Must Pass, released in 1970, was a triple-album masterpiece featuring songs previously rejected by the Beatles. My Sweet Lord topped the charts, marking George as a formidable solo artist. Critics recognized his genius, and fans were captivated by his blend of rock, spiritual depth, and melodic sophistication. George continued to explore his passions beyond music. He co-organized the Concert for Bangladesh in 1971, a historic benefit event that brought together Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and Ringo Starr. The concert not only raised awareness and funds, but also inspired future humanitarian concerts, including Live Aid. He also founded Handmade Films, rescuing Monty Python's Life of Brian and other projects from financial collapse. Throughout it all, George maintained a simple, introspective life, valuing family, spirituality, and inner peace. He passed away in 2001, leaving a legacy defined by creativity, compassion, and humility. Paul McCartney, Resilience and Reinvention. The Beatles' breakup hit Paul hard. Retreating to a Scottish farm, he grappled with depression and isolation. Yet, through this darkness, he found strength in Linda Eastman. Linda became his life partner, creative collaborator, and emotional anchor. Together, they formed Wings, a band that brought Paul back to global prominence with hits like Band on the Run, Live and Let Die, and Mull of Kintyre. Wings allowed Paul to reclaim his musical identity while exploring new horizons. Paul's solo career expanded his legacy further. Collaborations with Stevie Wonder, Ebony and Ivory, and Michael Jackson, Say, produced iconic hits that transcended generations. Beyond music, he became an advocate for humanitarian causes, including animal rights, anti-landmine campaigns, and music education. Despite professional success, Paul's personal life was turbulent. Linda's death in 1998 brought profound grief, followed by a high-profile divorce from Heather Mills. Eventually, he found peace with Nancy Shevell, marrying in 2011 and reclaiming a sense of personal stability. Lessons from conflict and creativity. The story of Paul and George illustrates the fragile balance between genius and ego. Even the most celebrated artists are not immune to conflict, misunderstandings, or philosophical differences. George found fulfillment in creative freedom and spiritual exploration, while Paul discovered resilience, love, and ongoing artistic innovation. Together and apart, they demonstrated that talent alone is not enough. Vision, empathy, and personal growth are equally essential. Their journey is a reminder that creativity often comes with struggle, and greatness is rarely linear. Behind the music, beyond the applause, and away from the fame, Paul and George's lives reveal the unseen battles that shape not only art, but the artists themselves. Even as they walked separate paths, their legacy remains intertwined. The music, the conflicts, the triumphs, and the heartbreak all contributed to a story that continues to inspire. In their struggles, we see humanity. In their successes, we see what dedication, talent, and passion can achieve. And in their fractures, we recognize the silent truth that sometimes even the brightest stars cast shadows.